My wife made fun of my career at her elite office party. I broke off the marriage right in front of her co-workers and her CEO. Let me tell you something about being 31 and having your shit figured out. It's a rare breed in Manhattan, and even rarer when you've got grease under your fingernails and a law degree collecting dust on your office wall. Most guys my age are either drowning in student debt from some overpriced MBA program or kissing ass at Goldman Sachs, hoping their portfolio doesn't tank before their next performance review. Me? I carved out my own little empire in the most unlikely way possible. My old man was a small-town attorney in upstate New York, the kind who handled everything from DUIs to property disputes for farmers who paid him in cash and handshakes. Growing up, our house was a battlefield between stacks of dusty case files and car manuals sticky with motor oil. Dad would be reviewing contracts for the local bank, while simultaneously rebuilding a transmission in the garage. Most kids would have gone insane, but I found the chaos oddly comforting. There's something beautifully honest about both worlds. The precision required to draft airtight litigation documents and the raw satisfaction of making a dead engine purr like a contented cat. While my law school classmates were gunning for positions at white shoe firms, spending their summers as unpaid interns fetching coffee for partners who wouldn't remember their names, I was learning a different kind of due diligence. I'd spend mornings in contracts class, then afternoons under the hood of my professor's BMW, fixing whatever expensive German engineering had decided to quit working that week. The other students thought I was nuts. Here I was, potentially throwing away a six-figure starting salary to get my hands dirty. But here's the thing nobody tells you about the legal industry. It's all about relationships and trust. And nothing builds trust faster than being the guy who can fix someone's Tesla when it's having a software meltdown at 2 a.m., especially when that someone happens to be a venture capitalist who's about to close a series of funding round. That's how I ended up opening my boutique garage on the Upper West Side. And when I say boutique, I mean it. This wasn't some corner shop where you drop off your Honda Civic and hope for the best. This was discreet, high-end automotive consulting for people who had more money than mechanical knowledge and valued privacy above everything else. CEOs who didn't want their competitors knowing their Porsche 911 was in for repairs. Attorneys whose BMWs needed to be pristine for client meetings. Investors who treated their vintage cars like liquid assets that required white-glove maintenance. The location wasn't cheap. Upper West Side real estate makes most people's trust funds weep, but it was strategic. I was positioned perfectly between the corporate towers of Midtown and the tech startups sprouting like expensive weeds in Brooklyn. My client list read like a Forbes directory: hedge fund managers, private equity partners, legal tech entrepreneurs who were disrupting traditional law firms with AI and machine learning platforms. But the real genius move was the legal consulting side. While I had their cars, I'd casually mention my background in compliance and contract structuring. Turns out, a lot of these small legal tech startups were desperate for someone who understood both the technical and regulatory sides of their business. They couldn't afford the big law firm rates, but they had something better: equity. So there I was, negotiating compliance reviews for SaaS companies in exchange for stock options, reviewing intellectual property agreements for AI-driven legal research platforms, helping fintech startups navigate securities regulations. Every contract I structured, every compliance framework I designed, was another small stake in what I hoped would become the next big acquisition target. My office was a converted warehouse space, half garage, half law firm. On one side, you'd see a Tesla Model S on the lift getting its annual service, and on the other, I'd be video conferencing with the board of directors for some startup that was revolutionizing contract management. The aesthetic was deliberately eclectic: Tom Ford suits hanging next to work coveralls, expensive whiskey next to motor oil, law books sharing shelf space with automotive manuals. The portfolio was growing slowly but steadily. Nothing flashy, nothing that would get me invited to charity galas at the Grand Meridian Ballroom or onto any venture capital Christmas card lists, but solid, sustainable growth. I wasn't pulling down the kind of money that would get me mentioned in TechCrunch or land me a penthouse overlooking Central Park, but I was building something that was entirely mine. My track record was impressive in its own quiet way. 3 startups I'd helped structure their legal frameworks had successful exits, 2 through strategic acquisitions by larger tech companies, 1 through an IPO that made everyone involved very, very happy. The word-of-mouth referrals were picking up, and suddenly I wasn't just the guy who fixed expensive cars. I was becoming known as someone who could navigate the complex intersection of technology, law, and business. The lifestyle wasn't glamorous by Manhattan standards. No private jet trips or $48,000 venue receptions. No name-dropping sessions about which venture capitalist was funding the latest unicorn or which law firm was handling the biggest hostile takeover of the quarter. But I had something most of those corporate climbers didn't: actual ownership in my own success. I drove my work home in a modified Tesla Model S. Nothing too flashy, but efficient and reliable, just like my business model. The apartment was a decent one-bedroom in a pre-war building, close enough to work that I could walk, but far enough from the financial district that I didn't have to deal with the daily parade of suits and their inflated egos. Looking back now, I realize I was building more than just a business. I was creating a life that made sense to me, one where the assets I accumulated and the relationships I built were based on actual value rather than corporate politics or inherited connections. Every piece of equity I earned, every client relationship I cultivated, every compliance framework I designed was another brick in a foundation that was entirely my own construction. Of course, I had no idea that this carefully constructed world of mine was about to collide spectacularly with someone else's definition of success. But that's a story for another chapter. If I thought my life was complicated balancing legal consulting with automotive repair, meeting Sophia was like adding rocket fuel to an already volatile mixture. She moved through Manhattan's elite legal circles like she was born to it, which, knowing her Upper East Side prep school background, she basically was. While I was building my reputation one compliance review and Tesla tune-up at a time, she was fast-tracking her way through the ranks at Whitmore and Associates, one of those white-shoe law firms where the coffee costs more than most people's hourly wage and the marble floors probably have their own insurance policies. The first time I saw her, she was arguing with a parking attendant outside my garage about whether her BMW X5 could stay in a loading zone for just 5 minutes while she grabbed her briefcase. She was wearing this killer Armani suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, gesturing with perfectly manicured hands while speaking in that authoritative tone that screamed, "I bill at $400 an hour, and I'm not afraid to use it." The parking attendant was clearly outmatched. You could see him mentally calculating whether it was worth arguing with someone who looked like she could tie him up in litigation for the next decade. I walked over and offered to move her car into one of my client spots. She looked me up and down. Work boots, jeans with actual grease stains, flannel shirt that had seen better days, and I could practically hear her mental gears grinding as she tried to categorize me. Was I the owner? An employee? Someone she should tip or someone she should network with? "You run this place?" she asked, glancing at the discreet signage that simply read, "Precision Automotive and Legal Solutions." "Guilty as charged," I said, taking her keys. Though I promise the legal part is more legitimate than it sounds. That got a laugh. Turns out she'd heard about me through the Manhattan Legal Gossip Network. Apparently word had gotten around about the mechanic lawyer who was helping startups navigate compliance issues while simultaneously maintaining the luxury car collections of half the partners in the city. Her firm had been buzzing about some legal tech startup that had just closed their Series B funding round, and my name had come up during partner meetings as someone who specialized in that exact intersection of technology and regulatory compliance. Within a month, we were dating. Within 6 months, I was spending more time in her world than my own, which should have been my first red flag. But hindsight is 20/20, and I was too busy being impressed by her connections to notice the warning signs. Sophia's world was intoxicating in the way expensive drugs probably are. You know it's not sustainable, but the high is incredible. She'd casually mention having lunch with the CFO of some Fortune 500 company, or dropping by board meetings where venture capitalists were throwing around series of funding numbers that made my equity stakes look like pocket change. Her calendar read like a who's who of Manhattan power players, private equity partners, investment banking directors, senior associates at law firms that handled billion-dollar acquisitions like they were grocery shopping. Her apartment was everything mine wasn't. A perfectly curated space in a doorman building where the lobby looked like it belonged in a museum and the elevator required a key for the penthouse floors. Everything was designer, everything was expensive, everything screamed, I've made it, and I want everyone to know. The Tom Ford suits hanging in her walk-in closet probably had a higher net worth than most small businesses. Her jewelry collection included pieces that could have funded a decent Series A round for a promising startup. The social calendar was relentless. Rooftop receptions at venues that charged more for a single evening than most people made in a month. Charity galas at the Grand Meridian Ballroom, where the champagne flowed like water and the crystal chandeliers cost more than luxury cars. Private jet trips to conferences where the real business happened in first-class cabins and exclusive after-parties, not in the convention halls where the regular attendees networked desperately with business cards and forced smiles. I tried to keep up, I really did. I'd trade my work boots for Italian leather, swap my flannel for designer button-downs, learn to make small talk about market positioning and revenue projections instead of engine diagnostics and legal precedents. But the more time I spent in her world, the more I realized how different our definitions of success really were. For Sophia, success was about visibility. It was about being seen at the right events, knowing the right people, having your name mentioned in the same breath as venture capitalists and private equity legends. She lived for the moments when someone would recognize her from a CNBC interview or when a reporter would ask for her opinion on the latest legal industry shakeup. Her LinkedIn profile read like a masterclass in corporate name-dropping, and her Instagram was a carefully curated collection of power lunch locations and charity gala photos. She loved introducing me to her colleagues, but there was always this undertone, this subtle way she'd position me as an amusing anomaly. "This is my boyfriend," she'd say. "He's got this fascinating little business where he fixes cars for executives and does legal consulting on the side." It's so refreshingly authentic. Refreshingly authentic, like I was some kind of artisanal product at a farmer's market, quaint and genuine, but ultimately not quite sophisticated enough for the main course. The more I watched her navigate board meetings and partnership negotiations, the more I understood that she saw relationships as strategic assets. Every connection was potentially valuable. Every conversation was an opportunity to advance her position in the firm's hierarchy. She could discuss hostile takeover strategies over cocktails and seamlessly transition to discussing private equity fund performance over dinner, all while mentally cataloging who might be useful for her next career move. Don't get me wrong. I admired her ambition, her intelligence, her ability to hold her own in rooms full of men who probably thought women lawyers were best suited for family court and estate planning. She was brilliant at what she did, and watching her deconstruct complex securities regulations or structure acquisition agreements was like watching an artist work. But somewhere along the way, I started to suspect that her admiration for my independence and authenticity had less to do with genuine respect and more to do with the novelty of dating someone who wasn't another cookie-cutter associate climbing the same ladder she was. The balance I thought we had, her corporate polish complementing my grounded practicality, was starting to feel more like a performance where I was playing a role she'd written for me. The independent entrepreneur who could fix things with his hands and navigate complex legal frameworks, but who ultimately knew his place in her carefully constructed professional hierarchy. I should have seen the writing on the wall when she started making comments about my potential and how I could really make something of myself if I focused more on the legal consulting and less on the automotive work. As if building a profitable business that served actual clients and generated real equity wasn't already making something of myself. As if success could only be measured by the size of your law firm or the exclusivity of your client list. But like I said, hindsight is 20/20, and I was still too caught up in the intoxicating rush of her world to realize that in her eyes, I wasn't a partner, I was a project. The invitation came on a Tuesday morning while I was elbow-deep in the engine bay of a venture capitalist's Porsche 911 Turbo S. Apparently, even billionaires can't escape the occasional electrical gremlin that makes German engineering throw a tantrum. Sophia called me from her corner office at Whitmore and Associates, her voice carrying that particular blend of excitement and expectation that usually meant she was about to drag me into something I'd regret. "Babe, you need to clear your calendar for December 15th, she announced without preamble. "No, good morning." "No, how's your day going?" "Just straight to business." Classic Sophia. I wiped my hands on a rag and grabbed my phone properly. "What's December 15th? The firm's annual holiday party." And before you even think about making excuses, this isn't some casual networking happy hour at a dive bar. This is the event of the year, Grand Meridian Ballroom, open bar with top-shelf everything, and every major player in Manhattan legal and finance will be there. I could practically hear her mentally organizing her talking points like she was preparing for a board meeting presentation. Through the phone, I caught the familiar sounds of her office, the soft ping of email notifications, the distant hum of associates billing hours like their lives depended on it, the occasional rustle of expensive paper that probably cost more per sheet than most people's lunch. Sophia, you know how I feel about those things. Corporate parties aren't exactly my scene. I'm more comfortable diagnosing transmission problems than diagnosing the political dynamics of your law firm's partnership structure. That's exactly why you need to come, she insisted, and I could hear her shifting into full attorney mode, that tone she used when she was building her case and expected to win. Richard Carmichael will be there. Who's Richard Carmichael? The CEO, obviously, along with the senior partners, major shareholders, and half the venture capital community. This isn't just a party. It's where deals get made, partnerships get formed, and careers get advanced. The CFO told me yesterday that they're considering expanding their legal tech consulting division, and your name came up. That got my attention. Whitmore and Associates wasn't some boutique firm struggling to pay rent. They were the kind of outfit that handled IPOs for companies going public, structured acquisition deals worth hundreds of millions, and had a client list that read like a Fortune 500 directory. If they were genuinely interested in expanding into legal tech consulting, that could mean serious opportunities for someone with my particular skill set. But still, the thought of spending an evening making small talk with corporate lawyers and private equity partners made my skin crawl. I was much more comfortable negotiating compliance frameworks for startups than navigating the social minefield of Manhattan's legal elite. Give me a complex contract dispute or a tricky securities regulation problem any day over cocktail party politics. I don't know, sophomore. These things always feel like performance art to me. Everyone's working angles, trying to position themselves for the next promotion or partnership opportunity. It's exhausting. Listen, she said, and her voice took on that patient but firm quality she used with difficult clients. I get that you're not naturally comfortable with corporate schmoozing, but this is important to me. To us. The partners have been asking about you. They're curious about the guy who's built this hybrid business model that nobody else has figured out. You're like this fascinating anomaly to them. Fascinating anomaly. There it was again, that phrase she used when she wanted to position me as something interesting but ultimately harmless, like an exotic pet that could do tricks but wouldn't threaten anyone's territory. Besides, she continued, it would prove that you can fit into my world when it matters. I know you think I don't appreciate what you've built, but I do. This would be a chance to show everyone else why I'm with someone who thinks outside the traditional corporate box. The word prove stuck in my mind like a splinter. Since when did I need to prove anything to her colleagues? My track record spoke for itself. Profitable quarters, sustainable growth, a client list of satisfied CEOs, and successful startup exits. But apparently, none of that mattered if I couldn't make appropriate small talk at a law firm holiday party. I looked around my garage, the Tesla Model S still on the lift, the wall of certifications and compliance frameworks I developed for various legal tech startups, the corner office where I'd video conferenced with more venture capitalists in the past year than most MBA graduates meet in their entire careers. This was my world, and it was a good world. Why did I need to prove it belonged in theirs? But the hope in her voice was hard to ignore. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being too rigid, too comfortable in my own little ecosystem. If Whitmore and Associates was genuinely interested in legal tech consulting, this could be the kind of strategic partnership that would take my business to the next level. Series of funding rounds were great, but landing a white shoe law firm as a client could mean the difference between modest success and genuine wealth accumulation. What's the dress code? I asked, already knowing I was going to regret this decision. Black tie optional, but everyone will be in their best. Think Tom Ford, not Men's Warehouse. This is about making an impression. I mentally calculated the cost of a new suit versus the potential upside of networking with Manhattan's legal and financial elite. My father's voice echoed in my head. He always said that the best legal advice he could give was to know when you were outgunned and when you needed to adapt your strategy accordingly. Fine, I said finally. But I'm driving my Tesla. not taking a cab. And I'm not staying past midnight. I've got a compliance review scheduled with a fintech startup first thing Monday morning. Deal. The excitement in her voice was genuine, and for a moment I remembered why I'd fallen for her in the first place. When Sophia was happy, she was magnetic, the kind of person who could convince venture capitalists to fund impossible ideas or talk federal investigators into reconsidering their approach to securities fraud cases. Oh, and we're the cufflinks your father gave you, she added. They'll love that kind of family legacy touch. Very old money, very established. After I hung up, I stood there for a moment, looking at the Porsche's engine bay and wondering what the hell I'd just agreed to. The venture capitalist who owned this car had made his fortune by knowing when to take calculated risks and when to walk away. Maybe this party would be a calculated risk worth taking. Maybe Sophia was right, and I was being unnecessarily stubborn about staying in my comfort zone. Or maybe I was about to walk into a room full of sharks while wearing a suit that screamed, "I don't belong here," and discovered just how different our definitions of success really were. But like any good attorney knows, sometimes you have to present your case to the jury, even when you're not entirely sure what verdict you're hoping for. Walking into the Grand Meridian Ballroom was like stepping into a different universe, one where money had its own gravitational field and everyone orbited around it with practiced precision. The place was absolutely dripping with wealth in that understated way that only comes when you have so much money that you don't need to be obvious about it. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks, each one probably worth more than most people's annual salary, casting prismatic light across marble floors that reflected the soft glow like a mirror-polished lake. I adjusted my Tom Ford suit, the one investment I'd made specifically for this evening, and tried to look like I belonged here. The cufflinks my father had given me for law school graduation caught the light, a small anchor to my own heritage in this sea of corporate aristocracy. Sophia glided beside me in a designer gown that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, her hand resting proprietarily on my arm as she surveyed the room like a general assessing a battlefield. "There's Richard Carmichael," she whispered, nodding toward a distinguished man in his 50s who was holding court near the bar. CEO and managing partner. The guy basically built this firm from a mid-tier practice into one of the top legal powerhouses in Manhattan. Worth about $40 million, according to the Forbes estimates. I watched Carmichael work the room with the kind of effortless authority that comes from years of closing billion-dollar deals and managing egos that could power small countries. He moved from group to group, spending exactly the right amount of time with each cluster of associates and partners, dispensing wisdom and charm in perfectly measured doses. This was a man who understood that networking wasn't just about business cards and LinkedIn connections. It was about creating an ecosystem where everyone believed they were important enough to matter. The bar was a work of art in itself, top-shelf everything, with bottles of Macallan 25 sitting alongside crystal decanters of single malt scotches that probably cost more per ounce than most people's hourly wage. I watched a venture capitalist I recognized from TechCrunch articles casually order a glass of whiskey that would have funded a small startup's monthly server costs. The bartenders moved with the kind of practiced efficiency that suggested they'd served everyone from Fortune 500 CEOs to federal judges, and probably had more insider information about Manhattan's power structures than most financial reporters. That's Patricia Montenegro. Sophia continued her guided tour of the legal and financial elite, senior partner in the corporate acquisition division. She handled the hostile takeover of Rosewood Tech last year. You know, that cybersecurity software company that got bought out for $2 billion? And the guy she's talking to is James Chun from New York Investment Group. His private equity fund just closed their latest round at $800 million. I nodded and tried to look appropriately impressed while mentally calculating how many compliance reviews I'd need to complete to reach even a fraction of the net worth casually wandering around this room. These weren't just successful lawyers and investors. They were people who had transcended traditional definitions of career success and entered that rarefied atmosphere where money wasn't just a means to an end, but a way of keeping score in a game most people didn't even know they were playing. The Caviar Station was surrounded by a cluster of senior associates discussing the latest IPO they'd shepherded through the regulatory maze. I caught fragments of their conversation, Something about due diligence processes and risk profiles that would make or break a company's debut on the public markets. One of them mentioned a legal tech startup that had just completed their Series B funding round, and I recognized the company name from a compliance framework I'd helped structure 6 months earlier. Small world, especially when you're operating in the narrow intersection of technology and securities law. Oh, there's the CFO, Sophia said, steering me toward a woman in an impeccably tailored Armani suit who was deep in conversation with what looked like a board of directors worth of gray-haired men in expensive suits. Miranda Ashworth. She came over from Goldman Sachs 3 years ago and completely revolutionized the firm's financial strategy. Rumor is she's being courted by at least 2 Fortune 500 companies for their top financial positions. Miranda Ashworth looked like the kind of person who could restructure a company's entire debt portfolio while simultaneously negotiating international acquisitions and still have energy left to attend charity galas on the weekend. She moved through the conversation with the kind of sharp intelligence that made everyone around her seem slightly slower, slightly less informed about market positioning and revenue optimization strategies. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and tried to blend into the background while absorbing the atmosphere. This wasn't just a party. It was a masterclass in how power actually operated in Manhattan's elite circles. Deals weren't made in boardrooms and conference calls. They were sketched out over cocktails and crystallized during private conversations in marble-floored ballrooms where the lighting was flattering and the alcohol was expensive enough to make everyone feel generous with their equity stakes and investment commitments. A group of venture capitalists had commandeered a corner near the windows, their conversation a rapid-fire exchange of startup names, funding rounds, and market valuations that sounded like a foreign language to anyone not fluent in the dialect of disruption and scalability. I recognized a few faces from CNBC interviews and Forbes articles, the kind of people who could make or break a company's future with a single phone call or strategically timed press conference. The most surreal part was how normal it all felt to everyone else. These people weren't intimidated by crystal chandeliers or $500 bottles of wine or casual conversations about billion-dollar acquisitions. This was their natural habitat, the environment where they thrived and multiplied and made decisions that rippled through entire industries. They discussed federal regulatory changes with the same casual authority that most people brought to conversations about the weather and tossed around terms like hostile takeover and private equity restructuring, like they were talking about weekend plans. Sophia was in her element, moving through the crowd with the kind of confident grace that suggested she belonged here as much as anyone else. She knew exactly who to approach, exactly how long to spend with each group, exactly what combination of professional competence and social charm would advance her position in the firm's complex hierarchy. Watching her work the room was like observing a master craftsperson. Every interaction was purposeful, every smile was calculated, every conversation was an investment in her carefully constructed professional portfolio. I stayed close to her side, sipping champagne and trying to look like I was enjoying myself rather than mentally cataloging escape routes and wondering what the hell I was doing in a room where people casually discussed market manipulations and securities fraud investigations like they were debating restaurant recommendations. The evening was just getting started, and already I could feel the weight of expectations settling around my shoulders like an expensive but uncomfortable coat. The moment I'd been dreading finally arrived about an hour into the party, right when I was starting to think I might actually survive the evening without embarrassing myself or Sophia. I'd been doing a decent job of blending into the background, nursing my champagne and nodding along to conversations about venture capital trends and regulatory compliance issues. Hell, I'd even managed to have a semi-intelligent discussion with one of the senior associates about the challenges of structuring series of funding rounds for legal tech startups. Maybe this whole thing wouldn't be the disaster I'd anticipated. That optimism lasted exactly until Sophia decided it was time for me to meet the real power players. "Come on," she said, linking her arm through mine with the kind of determined smile that should have set off every alarm bell in my head. "I want you to meet some people." She led me across the marble floor toward a cluster of the firm's heavy hitters, senior partners, the CFO Miranda Ashworth, and a couple of venture capitalists whose names I recognized from Forbes articles about billion-dollar acquisition deals. At the center of the group stood Richard Carmichael himself, the CEO and managing partner, holding court with the kind of effortless authority that comes from years of making decisions that affect entire industries. "Richard," Sophia called out as we approached, her voice carrying that perfect blend of respect and familiarity that suggested she knew exactly where she stood in the firm's hierarchy. "I'd like you to meet my boyfriend." Carmichael turned toward us with the practiced smile of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room, at least for the 30 seconds he was talking to them. He was the kind of guy who probably charged more for a single consultation than most people made in a month, but who could make you feel like he genuinely cared about your problems while he was bankrupting you with legal fees. "Ah, the famous boyfriend," he said, extending his hand with the kind of firm handshake that conveyed confidence without being aggressive. "Sophia's told us so much about you. You're the one with the unique business model, correct?" The way he said unique made it sound like a polite euphemism for something slightly embarrassing, like a medical condition that shouldn't be discussed in polite company. But I pushed down my instinctive defensiveness and tried to match his professional demeanor. "I run a specialized automotive consulting business and provide legal compliance services for tech startups," I explained, using the elevator pitch I perfected over the past couple of years. "It's a niche market, but there's significant demand for someone who understands both the technical and regulatory sides of emerging technologies." The group was listening politely, the kind of attentive silence that suggested they were genuinely curious about this unusual combination of skills. Miranda Ashworth, the CFO, actually looked intrigued. She'd probably seen enough traditional business models to appreciate something genuinely innovative when she encountered it. "That's fascinating," said one of the venture capitalists, a woman whose name I'd seen attached to several successful IPOs in the legal tech space. "The intersection of automotive and legal services. I imagine that gives you access to some interesting client relationships." I was starting to think this might actually go well. These people weren't just being polite. They seemed genuinely interested in understanding how my business model worked, how I'd identified and filled a gap in the market that nobody else had noticed. Maybe Sophia had been right about this being an opportunity to expand my professional network. That's when she decided to helpful. "Oh, he's being modest," Sophia laughed, and something in her tone made my stomach drop. "What he does is actually pretty simple. He fixes cars for rich people and writes contracts for tech companies that can't afford real lawyers. It's basically blue-collar work with a legal twist." The change in the group's energy was instantaneous and brutal. The polite interest disappeared, replaced by the kind of awkward silence that follows when someone accidentally reveals they don't understand the social dynamics of the conversation they're having. Miranda Ashworth's expression shifted from intrigue to barely concealed amusement, and I watched the venture capitalist's eyes glaze over as she mentally reclassified me from interesting professional contact to Sophia's quirky boyfriend with the cute hobby business. But Sophia wasn't done yet. She was on a roll, apparently thinking her explanation was charming rather than condescending. "Isn't that adorable?" she continued, squeezing my arm like I was a pet she was showing off to friends. "He's like a modern-day grease monkey, just with a legal pad in one hand and a wrench in the other. Most mechanics can barely balance their own checkbooks, but this one went to law school." The group chuckled, that polite, uncomfortable laughter that people use when someone has just said something embarrassing and they don't know how to respond. Richard Carmichael's smile became slightly more fixed, the kind of expression that suggested he was already mentally calculating how quickly he could extract himself from this conversation without being rude to a promising associate. I felt my face burning with humiliation and rage, but I was trapped, stuck in the middle of a circle of Manhattan's legal and financial elite, while my girlfriend casually destroyed any credibility I might have had with them. Every word out of her mouth was making it worse, turning my carefully constructed professional reputation into a punchline for people who probably spent more on lunch than my average client paid for a complete compliance review. "He's got his own little garage on the Upper West Side," she continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that she was systematically dismantling everything I'd worked to build. "It's so authentic, so different from all the corporate ladder climbing we do. Sometimes I think it must be nice to work with your hands, you know? No board meetings, no hostile takeovers to worry about, no pressure to bill enough hours to make partner. Just simple, honest work." Simple. Honest. Work. The words hit me like physical blows. She was describing my business, my life, like it was some kind of therapeutic hobby, a quaint alternative to real professional success. Never mind that I'd helped structure compliance frameworks for companies that had gone on to successful IPOs. Never mind that my automotive clients included CEOs whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small countries. Never mind that I'd built something from nothing, created value where none had existed before. The venture capitalist who'd seemed interested earlier was now checking her phone, clearly done with this conversation. Miranda Ashworth was looking around the room like she was searching for someone more worth talking to. Even the junior associates in the group seemed embarrassed on my behalf. But Richard Carmichael, to his credit, tried to salvage the situation. Well, he said with the kind of diplomatic smoothness that probably served him well during hostile takeover negotiations, "It sounds like you found a way to combine your interests in a unique way. That's admirable." Admirable. Another polite euphemism, this one roughly translating to pathetic, but we'll pretend it's not. The worst part was watching Sophia's face. She was beaming with pride, like she'd just delivered the most charming introduction in the history of corporate networking. She genuinely thought she was being supportive, highlighting my unconventional path in a way that would endear me to this crowd. She had no idea that every word out of her mouth was making it clear that she saw me as a novelty act, an interesting diversion from the serious business of making real money and wielding actual power. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped steel cables around my ribcage and was slowly tightening them. Every eye in the group was on me, waiting to see how I'd respond to being so thoroughly and publicly diminished by the woman who was supposed to be my partner, my supporter, my advocate in rooms exactly like this one. I managed to keep my voice steady, though I could hear the strain in it. "I should probably go check on some emails," I said. "Early morning tomorrow with a fintech compliance review." I excused myself and headed for the terrace, needing air, needing space, needing to be anywhere but in that circle of perfectly groomed sharks who had just watched me get fed to them by the person who was supposed to have my back. I thought the humiliation was over. I really did. After excusing myself from that circle of legal and financial sharks who'd watched Sophia casually destroy my professional reputation, I'd managed to find a quiet corner near the caviar station where I could nurse my wounded pride and my rapidly warming champagne. The Grand Meridian Ballroom continued to sparkle around me, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across marble floors, venture capitalists discussing series of funding rounds between bites of expensive appetizers, senior partners negotiating acquisition deals over glasses of Macallan 25. I was actually starting to think I might survive the rest of the evening, with whatever dignity I had left intact. Sure, Richard Carmichael and his inner circle now thought of me as Sophia's adorable grease monkey boyfriend. But Manhattan was a big city with plenty of legal tech startups who needed compliance consulting and didn't give a damn about white shoe law firm opinions. I could rebuild from this. I'd built my business from nothing before. I could do it again. That delusion lasted exactly until the speeches started. Richard Carmichael approached the small stage area that had been set up near the windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The room gradually quieted as word spread that the CEO was about to address his troops. Partners, associates, shareholders, and the various venture capitalists and private equity players who helped keep Whitmore and Associates at the top of the legal food chain. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carmichael began, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom without needing amplification. "Thank you all for joining us tonight for what has been an extraordinary year for our firm." He launched into the kind of speech that probably got delivered at similar events across Manhattan every night during the holiday season. Revenue growth, successful IPOs, high-profile acquisitions, new partnerships with Fortune 500 companies. The usual corporate victory lap, delivered with the kind of practiced charisma that made everyone in the room feel like they were part of something important and profitable. I half listened while scanning the room for Sophia, wondering if she'd realized yet that her charming introduction had gone over like a lead balloon with the firm's power players. She was nowhere to be seen, probably working the crowd and networking with the kind of focused intensity that had gotten her this far up the corporate ladder. "This has also been a year of innovation," Carmichael continued, "of finding new ways to serve our clients and expand our capabilities. Which brings me to one of the highlights of our evening. recognizing the outstanding contributions of our associates. A polite round of applause rippled through the room as several junior lawyers were called forward to receive acknowledgments for their work on various high-profile cases. I recognized a few names: associates who'd been mentioned in legal journals for their work on securities fraud investigations, partners who'd structured billion-dollar merger agreements, senior staff who'd navigated complex regulatory compliance issues for tech companies going through IPO processes. And now, Carmichael said, his voice taking on a warmer tone, I'd like to invite one of our rising stars to say a few words. Sofia Martinez has been instrumental in our expansion into the legal technology sector, bringing fresh perspectives and innovative approaches to some of our most challenging client relationships. My stomach dropped as I watched Sofia emerge from the crowd, looking absolutely radiant in her designer gown as she made her way toward the stage. This was her moment, the kind of recognition that could fast-track her toward partnership consideration, the validation of everything she'd worked for since joining the firm. She accepted the microphone from Carmichael with a gracious smile, taking a moment to survey the room full of Manhattan's legal and financial elite. When she spoke, her voice carried that perfect blend of confidence and humility that marked someone who understood exactly how to navigate corporate politics. Thank you, Richard, and thank you all for such an incredible year, she began. When I joined Whitmore and Associates 3 years ago, I knew I was joining something special, a firm that wasn't just about billable hours and profit margins, but about innovation and excellence. She was good at this, I had to admit. She knew how to work a room, how to make everyone feel included while simultaneously positioning herself as someone worth paying attention to. The crowd was eating it up, partners nodding approvingly, associates hanging on her every word, venture capitalists probably making mental notes about this rising star in Manhattan's legal hierarchy. This year, we've expanded our legal tech consulting division, helped shepherd 3 successful IPOs through the regulatory process, and structured acquisition deals worth over $2 billion in combined value. She continued, rattling off accomplishments that would make any law firm's annual report look impressive. I found myself feeling a grudging pride in her success, despite everything that had happened earlier. Whatever else you could say about Sofia, she was genuinely talented at what she did. She'd earned her place in this room, earned the right to stand on that stage and accept recognition from some of the most powerful people in Manhattan's legal establishment. That's when she decided to get personal. But I also want to take a moment to thank the people in our personal lives who support us through the long hours and high-pressure situations that come with this career, she said, and something in her tone made my blood turn to ice water. My boyfriend is here tonight, and I want to give him special recognition for being so understanding about the demands of our profession. No, she wasn't going to do this. Not here, not in front of everyone. He's not a corporate guy, but he's great with his hands, she continued, and I could feel the room's attention shifting toward me like a spotlight I desperately wanted to avoid. He runs this lovely little garage where he fixes cars for executives, and he dabbles in legal consulting for tech startups. It's so refreshingly authentic. The same condescending tone, the same diminishing language, but now amplified and broadcast to an entire ballroom full of people who controlled billions of dollars in assets and made decisions that shaped entire industries. If the boardroom ever breaks down, she said with a laugh that sounded like silver bells and felt like razor blades, you know who to call. The ballroom erupted in laughter, not the uncomfortable chuckling from earlier, but genuine, hearty laughter from people who thought they'd just heard the most charming anecdote of the evening. Partners were slapping each other on the back. Venture capitalists were wiping tears from their eyes. Even Richard Carmichael was smiling that indulgent smile that suggested he found the whole thing delightfully amusing. I stood there frozen, watching 300 of Manhattan's most powerful lawyers, investors, and corporate executives laugh at me like I was the punchline to a joke I hadn't even known was being told. Every eye in the room seemed to be on me. Every smile felt like a dagger. Every chuckle was another nail in the coffin of whatever professional credibility I might have had left. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was watching Sofia's face as she basked in the laughter. She was glowing with pride, clearly delighted that her little anecdote had gone over so well with the crowd. She genuinely thought she'd just delivered a charming, supportive tribute to her quirky boyfriend and his adorable little hobby business. She had no idea that she'd just publicly executed me in front of everyone who mattered in Manhattan's legal and financial establishment. No idea that she'd turned me into a laughingstock, a cautionary tale about what happened when you tried to play in the big leagues without understanding the rules of the game. As the laughter finally died down and she prepared to finish her speech, I realized with crystal clarity that this relationship was over. Not because of the humiliation, though that was certainly part of it, but because of what the humiliation revealed about how she really saw me, how she really valued what I'd built with my own hands and my own intelligence. I was never going to be her partner. I was always going to be her project, her amusing anecdote, her refreshingly authentic accessory to trot out when she wanted to show the corporate crowd how grounded and relatable she was. The applause was still echoing through the Grand Meridian Ballroom when I made my move. I couldn't stay in that marble-floored temple of corporate excess for another second, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and the lingering laughter of people who just watched my girlfriend turn me into their evening's entertainment. The Macallan 25 in my glass had gone warm, and everything about this place, from the caviar station to the venture capitalists discussing series of funding rounds like they were talking about the weather, suddenly felt suffocating. I pushed through the crowd of Tom Ford suits and designer gowns, past senior partners who were probably billing more per hour than most people made in a month, past CFOs who could restructure entire corporate hierarchies with a single phone call. Nobody noticed me leaving. Why would they? I was just the amusing grease monkey with the legal pad, the refreshingly authentic boyfriend who could fix their BMWs when the real business was done. The terrace was a blessed relief from the oppressive atmosphere inside. Manhattan sprawled out below me like a circuit board made of light, each window representing someone's ambition, someone's struggle, someone's attempt to carve out meaning in a city that consumed people's dreams and spat out profit margins. The December air was sharp enough to cut through the fog of expensive champagne and wounded pride that had been clouding my judgment all evening. I loosened my tie, the silk one I'd bought specifically for this disaster of an evening, and tried to process what had just happened. In the space of 2 hours, I'd watched my professional reputation get systematically dismantled by the woman who was supposed to be my partner, my advocate, my supporter in rooms exactly like the one I'd just escaped from. She'd turned my carefully constructed business model into a punchline, my hybrid expertise into a cute anomaly, my success into something adorable that rich people could chuckle about between discussions of hostile takeovers and private equity acquisitions. The worst part was that she genuinely didn't understand what she'd done. In her mind, she'd been supportive, charming, relatable. She'd humanized herself to the corporate crowd by showing them her down-to-earth boyfriend with his blue-collar roots and legal education. She thought she'd been building bridges between our worlds, when really she'd been burning them down with a smile on her face and a microphone in her hand. The door behind me opened with a soft whisper of expensive hinges, and I knew without turning around that it was Sophia. I could hear the rustle of her designer gown, smell the subtle perfume that probably cost more than most people's car payments, sense the particular energy she brought to every room, the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world of corporate power and Manhattan elite. "Why'd you run off?" she asked, her voice carrying that light, breezy tone that suggested she was genuinely puzzled by my behavior. Like I was being dramatic about something trivial, like a child throwing a tantrum because the adults were having important conversations. I kept looking out at the skyline, watching planes blink their way through the darkness toward airports where private jets were probably lined up like luxury cars in a dealership lot. Somewhere out there, in offices and penthouses and boardrooms, people were making decisions that would ripple through entire industries. And here I was, standing on a terrace trying to explain to my girlfriend why being publicly humiliated in front of 300 of Manhattan's most powerful people might have hurt my feelings. "You humiliated me," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "In front of everyone who matters in your professional world. You turned me into a joke." "Oh, stop." She moved to stand beside me at the railing, and I could see her reflection in the glass doors behind us. Perfectly composed, perfectly groomed, perfectly confused by my reaction. Everyone loved it. "Don't be so dramatic." Dramatic. There was that word again, The one she used whenever I had the audacity to have feelings about something that didn't align with her perception of reality. Like my emotional response to being professionally eviscerated was some kind of character flaw, some sign that I wasn't sophisticated enough to understand the nuances of corporate social dynamics. Everyone loved laughing at me. I corrected. There's a difference. They weren't laughing at you. They were laughing with you. It was charming. Relatable. Do you know how rare it is in these circles to meet someone who's actually built something with their own hands? You're like this fascinating anomaly to them. Fascinating anomaly. She kept using that phrase, like it was a compliment instead of a polite way of saying I didn't belong in her world, but was amusing enough to keep around for entertainment value. Like I was an exotic pet that could do tricks, but would never be considered an equal member of the pack. I've heard you call my work blue-collar busy work before, I said, turning to face her for the first time since she'd joined me on the terrace. You've dismissed my equity stakes in startups as hobby investments. Tonight, you stood up in front of the CEO of your firm, venture capitalists worth hundreds of millions of dollars, senior partners who handle billion-dollar acquisitions, and you introduced me like I was your pet mechanic who'd learned to read legal documents. The confusion in her eyes was genuine, and that made it worse somehow. She truly didn't understand why being reduced to a punchline in front of Manhattan's legal and financial elite might be problematic for someone who was trying to build a serious business in that exact ecosystem. But you are a mechanic who learned legal consulting, she said, as if stating an obvious fact. That's what makes you interesting. That's your brand. My brand. Like I was a marketing campaign instead of a person, like my professional identity was some kind of gimmick designed to make her look more well-rounded to her corporate colleagues. She'd turned my life's work into a quirky character trait that made her more interesting at cocktail parties. You want to know what my brand actually is? I asked, reaching into my jacket pocket for the small velvet box I'd been carrying around for 3 weeks, working up the courage to propose to someone who apparently saw me as an amusing accessory rather than an equal partner. My brand is someone who built a profitable business from nothing, who helps companies navigate complex regulatory frameworks, who's developed compliance systems for startups that have gone on to successful IPOs and billion-dollar acquisitions. I opened the box and showed her the platinum engagement ring I'd had custom designed, not flashy enough to compete with the hedge fund wives, but elegant and expensive enough to demonstrate that I took our relationship seriously. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I saw something that might have been regret flicker across her perfectly composed features. I was going to propose to you tonight, I continued, my voice gaining strength from the clarity that was finally cutting through months of accumulated doubts and dismissed concerns. I thought we were building something together, thought we were partners who complemented each other's strengths. But you don't see a partner when you look at me. You see a project, an interesting story you can tell at board meetings and charity galas. That's not true, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I love what you've built. I admire your independence. You love what I've built as long as it stays small enough not to threaten your narrative about yourself. You admire my independence as long as it doesn't actually challenge your assumptions about what success looks like. I closed the ring box and slipped it back into my pocket, a gesture that felt like closing a door on a room I'd never really been invited into anyway. The weight of it against my chest was a reminder of how wrong I'd been about everything. About us, about our future, about whether someone could actually love you while simultaneously being embarrassed by everything that made you who you were. You want a shareholder in status, not a partner in life? I said finally, the words coming out with a clarity that surprised me. And I finally understand that the best litigation I could ever win wouldn't be in court. It would be reclaiming my dignity from someone who never valued it in the first place. I slipped the platinum ring off my finger, the simple band my father had given me when I graduated law school, the one she'd always said looked too plain for someone dating a rising associate at a top Manhattan firm. I placed it in her perfectly manicured hand, watching her fingers close around it with the kind of automatic grace that came from years of handling valuable objects that belonged to other people. Good luck finding someone you actually respect, I said. Then I turned and walked back toward the ballroom, leaving her standing alone on the terrace with the Manhattan skyline spread out behind her like a promise I was finally ready to stop believing in. Walking back into that ballroom felt like stepping into an arena where I was about to face down every lion at once. The crystal chandeliers still cast their prismatic light across marble floors that reflected the soft glow of Manhattan's elite celebrating another profitable quarter. The same venture capitalists were still discussing Series B funding rounds over glasses of Macallan 25. The same senior partners were still networking about acquisition deals worth hundreds of millions, and Richard Carmichael was still holding court near the bar like the CEO king of his legal empire. But something fundamental had shifted in the 5 minutes I'd spent on that terrace. The humiliation was still there, burning in my chest like acid, but it had crystallized into something harder and more focused. Clarity, maybe, or just pure, righteous anger at being turned into a punchline by someone who was supposed to love me. I could see Sophia hurrying behind me through the glass doors, her designer gown rustling as she tried to catch up, probably hoping to contain whatever damage she thought my dramatic reaction might cause to her carefully constructed professional image. Her heels clicked against the marble with the kind of urgent staccato that suggested she was finally beginning to understand that this wasn't just another one of our minor disagreements about my blue-collar sensitivities. I made my way across the ballroom with purpose, weaving between clusters of Tom Ford suits and corporate power players who were too absorbed in their own conversations about hostile takeovers and private equity acquisitions to notice the unfolding drama. A few faces turned toward me, associates who'd witnessed the earlier introduction, partners who'd been part of the laughing audience during Sophia's speech, but most of the room was still basking in the warm glow of expensive champagne and mutual
The table where
Richard Carmichael and his inner circle had established their command post was near the windows, offering a perfect view of the Manhattan skyline that stretched out like a glittering testament to ambition and ruthless competitiveness. Miranda Ashworth, the CFO, was deep in conversation with a venture capitalist whose name I recognized from Forbes articles about billion-dollar tech investments. A couple of senior partners were discussing the regulatory implications of some IPO they were shepherding through the SEC approval process. These were the people who mattered in Sophia's world, the ones who could make or break careers with a single phone call, who controlled enough capital to fund entire industries, who treated billion-dollar merger agreements like most people treated grocery lists. And they were all about to get front-row seats to the most honest thing that had happened in this ballroom all evening. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through their conversation with the kind of polite authority I'd learned from years of dealing with CEOs and venture capitalists in my own professional life. "Richard, I need to apologize for leaving early." Carmichael looked up with that practiced smile he'd perfected over decades of managing egos and expectations, though I caught a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. This wasn't standard social protocol. Boyfriends of associates didn't usually approach the managing partners table to make announcements, especially not when they looked like they had something important to say. "Of course," he said smoothly, probably mentally calculating how to handle whatever awkwardness was about to unfold without damaging his relationship with a promising associate. "Everything all right?" I could sense rather than see Sophia arriving behind me, her presence like a gathering storm cloud that was about to break over this perfectly controlled corporate gathering. Her hand touched my arm, fingers tightening with the kind of warning pressure that suggested I should remember where I was, who these people were, what was at stake for her career if I made a scene. "Don't make a scene," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but carrying enough urgency to make it clear that she finally understood this wasn't going to be handled with her usual combination of charm and dismissive humor. But the time for quiet compliance was over. I'd spent months adjusting my behavior to fit into her world, moderating my opinions to avoid embarrassing her in front of her colleagues, accepting her casual dismissals of my work as the price of admission to her social circle. I'd been the perfect accessory, interesting enough to be worth mentioning, but harmless enough not to threaten anyone's sense of hierarchy. I looked directly at Richard Carmichael, ignoring the growing tension radiating from Sophia beside me. "I won't stand by while my career is mocked for sport," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the immediate area and causing conversations to pause as people turned to see what was happening at the power table. The words hung in the air like a challenge, cutting through the polite veneer of corporate networking and expensive champagne. Miranda Ashworth's eyebrows rose slightly, and I could see the venture capitalist leaning forward with the kind of sudden interest that suggested he recognized drama when it was about to unfold. Even the senior partners stopped their discussion of regulatory compliance issues to focus on this unexpected breach of ballroom etiquette. "This engagement is over," I announced, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. The effect was immediate and electric. Gasps rippled outward from our table like shock waves, spreading across the ballroom as word of the announcement traveled through the crowd. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, champagne glasses paused halfway to lips, and suddenly every eye in the Grand Meridian Ballroom seemed to be focused on our little drama. Sophia stood frozen beside me, the platinum ring I'd given her still clutched in her trembling hand, her face cycling through expressions of shock, embarrassment, and what might have been the first genuine understanding of what she'd actually done to us tonight. The perfectly composed associate who'd commanded the stage just minutes earlier was gone, replaced by someone who was finally seeing the consequences of treating another person's life like material for her networking anecdotes. Richard Carmichael, to his credit, handled the situation with the kind of diplomatic grace that had probably served him well during countless hostile takeover negotiations and partnership disputes. He nodded slightly, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both understanding and respect. Maybe he recognized something in my decision that resonated with his own experience of corporate power plays and professional dignity. "I understand," he said simply, and somehow those two words carried more weight than all the polite pleasantries I'd endured throughout the evening. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair and walked toward the exit, leaving behind the crystal chandeliers and marble floors, the expensive whiskey and corporate networking, the whole glittering world where success was measured in billable hours and partnership tracks rather than actual value created or problems solved. Behind me, I could hear the ballroom slowly coming back to life as people processed what they'd just witnessed and began the inevitable post-mortem analysis that would fuel gossip at law firms and investment banks across Manhattan for weeks to come. The first 48 hours after the Grand Meridian Ballroom disaster were like watching a particularly brutal corporate takeover unfold in real time. Except this time, I was both the target company and the acquiring entity, trying to salvage whatever assets remained after the hostile acquisition of my dignity. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since I walked out of that crystal chandelier cathedral of corporate networking, but I let most of the calls go to voicemail, while I figured out exactly how much damage Sophia's public relations campaign was going to do to my carefully constructed business model. Because make no mistake, she was running a full-scale damage control operation that would have impressed any crisis management firm on Madison Avenue. Within hours of our very public breakup, she'd apparently called everyone in her professional network to spin the narrative in her favor. According to the Manhattan legal gossip mill, I was the insecure boyfriend who couldn't handle dating someone more successful, the blue-collar guy who'd gotten intimidated by the big leagues and bailed when things got serious. The story she was selling painted me as some kind of fragile ego case who'd thrown a tantrum because his girlfriend was more accomplished, more connected, more valuable to the corporate power structure that really mattered in this city. She'd turned my decision to reclaim my self-respect into evidence of my inadequacy, my refusal to be humiliated into proof that I couldn't handle being with someone who operated at her level. It was masterful, really. Diabolical, but masterful. The first crack in her carefully constructed narrative came from Jennifer Walsh, an associate at a competing firm who'd witnessed the whole debacle and apparently had her own opinions about Sophia's version of events. She texted me Tuesday morning with a screenshot that made my blood run cold and my confidence surge simultaneously. "She always said she settled for you because you were easy to control," the message read, along with a series of texts from some group chat where associates from various Manhattan law firms apparently discussed their personal lives like they were analyzing merger agreements. "Looks like you dodged a bullet. Easy to control." There it was, the real reason she'd been with me, spelled out in black and white with the kind of casual cruelty that suggested she'd never considered that I might someday see these conversations. I wasn't her partner. I was her pet project, someone she could manage and manipulate while she climbed the corporate ladder toward partnership and power. But Jennifer wasn't done. She'd apparently been collecting screenshots for months, building a portfolio of Sophia's private comments about our relationship that read like a master class in psychological manipulation. Comments about how my blue-collar background made me grateful for any attention from someone in her social circle. observations about how my business was cute but not really scalable compared to real corporate law career tracks. Analysis of how dating someone beneath her station made her seem more relatable to partners who appreciated associates with authentic connections to working-class values. Working-class values. Like I was some kind of sociological experiment rather than someone who'd built a profitable business serving Fortune 500 executives and helping legal tech startups navigate series of funding rounds. The more screenshots Jennifer shared, the clearer the picture became. Sophia hadn't just been embarrassed by me at that holiday party. She'd been systematically undermining me for months, using our relationship as material for networking conversations and professional positioning strategies. Every private moment we'd shared, every vulnerability I'd revealed, every success I'd celebrated had been filtered through her lens of corporate advancement and turned into content for her personal brand. But here's the thing about Manhattan's legal and financial community. It's smaller than you think, and gossip travels faster than SEC regulatory changes. By Wednesday, the real story was starting to circulate through the same networks that Sophia had tried to use for damage control. Associates were sharing their own experiences with her condescending attitude toward anyone who didn't fit her narrow definition of professional success. Partners were remembering conversations where she'd been dismissive of clients who came from non-traditional backgrounds. Even more satisfying, someone had apparently leaked details about the holiday party incident to the broader legal community. Word was spreading about the associate who'd publicly humiliated her boyfriend in front of the firm's CEO and biggest clients, then acted surprised when he refused to accept that treatment. Suddenly, the narrative was shifting from insecure boyfriend couldn't handle successful girlfriend to rising associate shows poor judgment in personal relationships and professional settings. The turning point came when Richard Carmichael himself called me on Thursday afternoon. I was in my garage working on a Tesla Model S belonging to a fintech CEO who was preparing for an IPO, trying to lose myself in the honest satisfaction of diagnosing and fixing actual problems instead of navigating corporate politics and relationship drama. I wanted to follow up on what happened the other night, he said without preamble, his voice carrying the kind of direct authority that probably made hostile takeover negotiations more efficient. I've been hearing some concerning things about the circumstances that led to your announcement. I set down my diagnostic tablet and gave him my full attention. Richard Carmichael wasn't the kind of person who made social courtesy calls, and he definitely wasn't someone who got involved in associates' personal drama unless it affected the firm's reputation or business interests. What I saw at that party, he continued, was someone being publicly disrespected by a person who should have been supporting them. What I'm hearing now suggests that wasn't an isolated incident. The conversation that followed was unlike anything I'd expected. Carmichael had apparently been doing his own due diligence on my business model, talking to clients and partners who'd worked with me on compliance consulting projects. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. CEOs who praised my ability to navigate complex regulatory frameworks, venture capitalists who'd been impressed by my technical expertise during Series B funding rounds, startup founders who credited my compliance strategies with helping them avoid SEC investigations. The legal tech sector is exploding, he said, and we need consultants who understand both the technical and regulatory sides of these businesses. Your track record speaks for itself. By Friday, I was fielding calls from 3 different law firms interested in establishing formal partnership agreements for legal tech consulting. 2 venture capital firms wanted to discuss potential investment opportunities in my business model. A private equity group was asking about acquisition possibilities for companies that had successfully bridged the gap between traditional legal services and emerging technology platforms. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sophia's attempt to diminish my professional reputation had actually ended up showcasing my value to exactly the market I'd been trying to reach. Her public humiliation had become the best marketing campaign I could never have afforded, demonstrating to Manhattan's legal and financial elite that I was someone who wouldn't be pushed around, who understood my own worth, who had the backbone to walk away from situations that didn't serve my interests. Meanwhile, the gossip about Sophia's behavior was starting to have professional consequences. Word had reached the firm's management that she'd shown poor judgment in how she'd handled her personal relationships in professional settings. Partners were questioning whether someone who would publicly embarrass a boyfriend might also make questionable decisions with client relationships or sensitive information. I heard through Jennifer that Sophia had been passed over for a promotion she'd been expecting, with feedback that suggested the firm was concerned about her interpersonal judgment and professional boundaries. The same qualities that had made her effective at corporate networking, the calculating approach to relationships, the strategic use of personal information, the willingness to sacrifice others for professional advantage, were suddenly being viewed as potential liabilities in client-facing situations. By the end of the week, I'd signed my first major consulting contract with a legal tech startup that was preparing for series of funding. The compliance framework I designed for them would be worth more in equity than 6 months of my previous revenue model. I'd also finalized a partnership agreement with a boutique law firm that specialized in IPO preparation, giving me access to clients who needed exactly the kind of technical legal expertise I'd been developing. The best part? I did it all while wearing my work clothes, speaking my mind, and refusing to apologize for building something valuable with my own hands and intelligence. 6 months later, I'm standing on the balcony of my new Upper West Side penthouse, holding a glass of Macallan 25 and watching Manhattan sparkle like a circuit board of ambition beneath me. The engagement ring I never gave Sophia funded the down payment for this place. Turns out a custom platinum setting holds its value better than most venture capital investments, and the symbolism was too perfect to ignore. The view from up here tells a different story than the one I was living a year ago. Those lights aren't just corporate towers full of people climbing ladders I'll never understand. They're potential clients, strategic partners, opportunities waiting for someone with my particular combination of skills to help them navigate the intersection of technology and regulation. My garage has expanded into 3 locations, each one serving a different segment of Manhattan's executive automotive needs. The legal consulting side has exploded beyond anything I imagined possible. I'm now the go-to compliance expert for legal tech startups preparing for IPO, with equity stakes in companies that are attracting Series B funding rounds worth hundreds of millions. Forbes mentioned my business model in an article about innovative approaches to legal services, and TechCrunch featured me in a piece about the future of regulatory consulting. The best part isn't the money or the recognition, though both are satisfying in ways I'm not too proud to admit. The best part is teaching the next generation. Young mechanics who want to understand contract law students who are curious about hands-on problem solving, entrepreneurs who need someone who can translate between corporate boardrooms and actual technical expertise. Looking back, that disaster at the Grand Meridian Ballroom wasn't about one toast or one relationship. It was about respect, understanding the difference between someone who sees you as an equal partner and someone who sees you as a strategic asset to be managed. I raised my glass to the Manhattan skyline, toasting my freedom and the hard-earned knowledge that the best litigation isn't always fought in courtrooms. Sometimes it's about reclaiming your dignity from people who never valued it in the first place.